Akamai Edge DNS service disruption. A DevOps Postmortem. Imagine it's July 22nd, 2021. You're sitting in your chair, and suddenly the internet just stops. It isn't a local glitch or a single server hiccup. It's a foundational collapse of the digital map. At exactly 15:45 Universal Time Coordinated, a software configuration update hits Akamai's secure edge content delivery network, and like a row of falling dominoes, global connectivity begins to crumble. Within minutes, websites across the globe go dark, becoming unreachable for users everywhere. This wasn't some sophisticated cyber attack. It was a ghost in the machine, a bug lurking in a mapping component that effectively erased the path to millions of destinations. For 60 agonizing minutes, the digital world went silent. By 16:22 Universal Time Coordinated, the alarm bells were screaming, and Akamai officially acknowledged an emerging issue. The scale was massive, the stakes were absolute, and for 1 hour, the backbone of the modern web simply vanished. Imagine a world where you type in a URL and the page just doesn't load. That's what happens when your DNS, the literal phone book of the internet, decides to go on strike. On July 22nd, 2021, Akamai Technologies sat at the center of this storm. They run a massive, secure edge content delivery network, and for many companies, their infrastructure relies on Akamai's Edge DNS service just to stay visible to the public. When that system fails, websites don't just lag, they vanish from the map. At 15:45 Universal Time Coordinated, a routine software configuration update pushed a bug into a mapping component, effectively pulling the plug on global connectivity for dozens of major sites. For about 1 hour, the internet became a ghost town for anyone trying to reach those services. It wasn't a cyber attack. It was a classic case of a quick fix turning into a massive, wide-scale outage that proved just how fragile our digital backbone really is. It was July 22nd, 2021. For most of the world, it started as just another standard day on the internet where things worked exactly the way they were supposed to. Akamai's secure edge content delivery network was humming along, handling the massive global traffic that keeps modern websites reachable and fast. Then at 15:45 Universal Time Coordinated, the routine became the catastrophic. A software configuration update was pushed into the system, a standard procedure, in theory, but one that carried a hidden bug within a mapping component. It wasn't a brute force cyber attack or a hardware failure. It was a silent logic error buried in the code. In an instant, the very backbone of the domain name service began to buckle. What started as a routine deployment was about to ripple outward, turning a localized configuration hiccup into a global blackout that would soon leave millions of users staring at dead links. It started on July 22nd, 2021, at exactly 15:45 Universal Time Coordinated. Most teams didn't even know the ground was shifting until the first tremors hit. A routine software configuration update pushed to Akamai's secure edge content delivery network triggered a bug in their domain name service system. A catastrophic failure for anyone relying on their DNS infrastructure. For those of us watching the monitors, it wasn't just a glitch, it was a blackout. By 16:22 Universal Time Coordinated, the emerging issue was no longer a whisper. It was a roar as websites across the globe began to vanish from the map. We weren't looking at a localized flicker or a minor spike in latency. This was a fundamental breakdown of reachability. In those first few minutes, the reality set in. If the DNS didn't resolve, the site didn't exist. The digital front doors were slammed shut by a single faulty configuration line. It started with a single configuration update, and in an instant, the secure edge infrastructure became a minefield. At 15:45 Universal Time, coordinated on July 22nd, 2021, that push hit the mapping component, triggering a bug that didn't just cause a hiccup, it paralyzed the DNS system entirely. This wasn't some localized glitch. It was a cascading failure of the very directory of the internet. By 16:22 Universal Time Coordinated, the team finally acknowledged an emerging issue as websites across the globe began to vanish from view. For those 60 minutes, the digital map was being erased in real time. The chaos only began to subside when they rolled back the change at 16:44 Universal Time Coordinated. By 16:50 Universal Time Coordinated, things were finally stabilizing, but the damage was done. It took until 1830 Universal Time Coordinated for them to confirm that the entire ordeal had lasted roughly 1 hour of pure, unadulterated chaos. So what actually broke the internet for those 60 minutes? It wasn't a sophisticated cyber attack or some phantom ghost in the machine. It was something much more common and far more painful: a botched configuration update. At 1545 Universal Time, coordinated on July 22, 2021, a software update pushed to a mapping component within Akamai's secure edge content delivery network triggered a latent bug in their DNS system. This isn't just a glitch. It was a fundamental failure of the translation layer that tells your browser where to go. Because the DNS service is the backbone of the internet, this specific bug effectively blinded the network, making countless websites unreachable globally almost instantly. It took the team until 1644 Universal Time Coordinated to identify and roll back that exact mapping change. By reverting the update, they restored functionality, but it served as a brutal reminder of how one tiny line of configuration can bring an entire ecosystem to its knees. When a core piece of infrastructure like the secure edge content delivery network fails, the blast radius isn't just a local fire. It's a global blackout. On July 22, 2021, that's exactly what hit the wire. A single software configuration update triggered a bug in Akamai's DNS system, effectively turning the internet into a series of dead ends for countless customers globally. From the moment the update pushed at 1545 Universal Time Coordinated until the rollback was finalized, websites were becoming unreachable across the map. While they eventually confirmed the disruption lasted approximately 1 hour, that 60-minute window is an eternity in the world of high-traffic web services. It wasn't a targeted strike or a cyber attack. It was a systemic failure of a foundational service. For those 60 minutes, the map of the internet simply stopped working for anyone relying on Akamai's Edge DNS to find their way. The clock hit 1545 Universal Time, coordinated on July 22, 2021, and suddenly, the internet started to fray at the edges. A routine software configuration update pushed into Akamai's secure edge content delivery network didn't just glitch, it triggered a bug that crippled their DNS system entirely. By 1622 Universal Time Coordinated, the emerging issue was no longer a whisper. It was a roar as websites across the globe began vanishing from view. The engineers were fighting a ghost in the machine, trying to pinpoint where the mapping component had warped. It wasn't an attack. It was a systemic collapse of reachability. The pressure mounted until 1644 Universal Time Coordinated when they finally identified the culprit and initiated a rollback on that specific configuration update. Within minutes, the fog lifted. By 1650 Universal Time Coordinated, services were back in the green, ending a frantic hour where the very backbone of web navigation had simply stopped working. The chaos finally hit a wall at 1644 Universal Time Coordinated when the team identified the culprit in a mapping component. They didn't need to reinvent the wheel. They just needed to undo the damage. The engineers executed a rollback of the specific software configuration update that had triggered the bug, effectively stripping away the broken logic and restoring the flow of traffic. By 1650 Universal Time Coordinated, the systems were officially confirmed as stable, bringing the total duration of the blackout to about 1 hour. But fixed doesn't mean forgotten. To keep this nightmare from haunting them again, the team tightened up their deployment protocols for critical infrastructure and began pushing for true redundancy in their DNS providers. They learned the hard way that when your global reach depends on a single point of failure, you don't just hope it works. You build a safety net to catch you when it doesn't. Look, if there's one thing this mess teaches us, it's that single point of failure isn't just a buzzword. It's a ticking time bomb. When a single configuration update in the mapping component managed to brick global DNS access for an hour on July 22, 2021, it exposed exactly how fragile our dependencies are. We can't just pray that our upstream providers are infallible. We have to engineer for their inevitable failures. Relying on one provider for a critical service like Edge DNS means your entire stack is at the mercy of their deployment pipeline. The real takeaway here is architectural redundancy. You need a Plan B that doesn't involve crossing your fingers and hoping the rollback happens by 1644 Universal Time Coordinated. Diversify your providers, harden your update processes, and build enough friction into the system so that one bad push can't take down the whole neighborhood. Resilience isn't just about good code. It's about assuming things will break and preparing for when they do. That's how Akamai Technologies turned a very bad day into a lesson. If this saved you an outage, subscribe for the next postmortem.